Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, February 9th, 2023. Time for another show. Still a little bit of lingering congestion here today, but we'll power through as we have for the rest of the week. And, of course, today, I guess I don't have to do anything at all because I mean, talk about your rafto stories, each day as Greg piles things up along with little bits of information and things that he's pulling from the articles. In the Skype chat, the numbers rack up, and I think we're up to like 24 messages this morning. Now, that's not 24 different stories necessarily, but all good pieces of input, some indication of how much material he's got to go with today. Not that we're going to fit it all in, of course, and sometimes he throws about 25 things out there as suggestions, and we get to 2, but that's okay. It's just, we're only in trouble if we start out with 0. Although some days, miraculously, he's got next to nothing and just sends me the link to the abbreviated pundit roundup. But the abbreviated pundit roundup has 25 things in it, too. So it's hard to tell. But it's always, I don't know, it's kind of exciting. Like, oh, this is going to be good. There's like 24 things to talk about. I don't know what any of them are. But at least one of them is the State of the Union address. And the fallout and analysis, I can see that already. And, we got a lot to catch up on. Of course, I know I spent a little bit more time than I really wanted to in giving you the background of various meddlings around the world by Russians and Russian-related and Russian-backed actors. And it does, like Gil was reminding me the other day, it does bring me back to the thought that it is awkward and uncomfortable to constantly have to say you're seeing the Russians behind every corner. It's unseemly, but sometimes they're actually there, and in an extraordinary or unexpected ways, I guess I should say. And I want to get back to that thread that we didn't finish yesterday from Caroline Bueno, who I didn't give you the final conclusion of that, and I think it's important for context. But while I have you here, and while we're getting ready in the morning, we had a big day. I spoke a little bit yesterday about how we're recovering in our Patreon account, and it's going well. And as a matter of fact, still more people responding to what we spoke about yesterday, which I guess indicates that we should be doing this every day. But let me add more names just quickly. Robert Hudson joined us, or was already on board as a sponsor, and boosted his sponsorship in response to my plaintive cries, I guess, yesterday. I also got a contribution from my brother Mark, which I know I feel a little bit weird and bad about it. It's like, shouldn't the family get it for everybody gets it for free? It's voluntary, so I guess it's not a bad thing. But, he was kind of like, well, you wore me down with all of that. We also got a contribution from Ryan. I'll just give the first name, Ryan, because he signed up for Patreon with a blank for the name. So I'm assuming that as some sort, he gave, I have his email address and everything. But he said also, my name is Ryan, and I think it's fair enough to identify him that way. If he wants more recognition than that, he's certainly welcome to it. Just drop me a note. But he also let us know that he's put us back above the 150 mark, the 150th or 151st donor to join us in Patreon. So you're in good company. As I keep saying, there's about 1,000 people downloading each day, but we're up above 10% of that now on Patreon alone. We also, I should note, had a contribution from Jeffrey Houlihan, who made a contribution directly on PayPal. That platform is available to everybody. We also use the Cash app by the Square people that make it possible for you to buy produce at the farmer's market on the spot when the guy swipes his card through your card through his iPhone. Same people backing that, so, a relatively stable platform, not too much to worry about security-wise. Okay, so with that out of the way, although that should be the major theme of the day, there are other themes that we can get to. Greg's got them all piled up. I don't know, I didn't see any outstanding issues on social media that absolutely required discussion this morning, except to say that it appears that more problems at Twitter. It is unclear whether it was intentional or part of a technical breakdown, but a lot of people were experiencing or I don't know how the message was delivered, but they were finding out that they had daily caps on the number of tweets that they could send. On what basis, I'm not sure, but it was not a big, not a manageable cap. I think people were telling us that they were being limited to like 6 an hour or 6 a day. I don't know. I didn't get one of the messages. I didn't go and look. But maybe Greg knows. Maybe he got one of those messages. Good morning, Greg. You have 5 words today. I don't know.
Well, gee,
All right.
Okay,
Thank you for joining us. Yeah. Did
the
you
funny
see anything
thing
like
is,
that?
at the same time, Twitter increased the number of characters you can write. In other words, you can write an essay now if you pay for it.
Well, maybe that
nobody
had something
wants
to do with it.
And it just like having a blue check.
Yes.
If you write a long essay, it's kind of identifying you
as being the kind of
being a
person
jerk.
who pays. For one thing, yeah, right. Monopolizing the screen.
A long essay. You must
right.
be one of those people who pay Elon Musk to be recognized.
Yeah, and there aren't a lot of them.
I read part of the essay and it's a jerk. I'll never do that again. None of your stuff. You're
that
blocked.
could feel like wasting your time. I did see something somewhere that said that he only had about 180,000 people take him up on the subscription thing, which for millions of users
losing money. And so the worry is that he's going to start charging per tweet, and that's when everybody's going to leave.
Oh, yeah. Well, that I think would drive everybody up the wall. But now the limitations, too. It drove another big wave of, migration to Mastodon, too.
I was not on the platform much yesterday, so I don't really know. But, from what my followers and people I'm following wrote, is they would just get a text message saying, you're limited to the number of followers you can follow.
Oh, the number of followers even. Oh, wow. Or people you can follow,
and then they couldn't tweet, and then they couldn't. There's a bunch of stuff they couldn't do. I skipped all of that. By the time I got on the platform later in the day, it was all fixed.
Oh, okay. There was some speculation I saw about whether or not it was intentional, but I guess it was just a breakdown in the they're having difficulty maintaining things. So I guess
that's what happens when you fire everybody who knows how things work.
Oh well. Womp womp.
In any case, speaking of how things work, although we saw the State of the Union on Tuesday.
Yeah,
and therefore had a discussion about it on Wednesday.
That's what we did.
Today, Thursday, we have the opportunity to read all the people who then had the time, all the talented scribes who had time to sit down and write about it, which we didn't have available to us Wednesday. We just gave our own impressions.
Yeah, right. They needed to. We were buying time for them to write their impressions down so that we could read them.
All right, and now they have, and so we will. And what's interesting is they had the same take we did. It's one of those situations where you really couldn't both sides this. It was just so one-sided that everybody, including the New York Times, had to do it.
Either that or we snap-pulled them into line.
Well, we have that too. So we have start with the New York Times, where the title is "Heckling of Biden Reflects a New Coarser Normal for House GOP." Repeated outbursts that interrupted the State of the Union address encapsulated the ethos of the new Republican majority, which styles itself after former President Trump.
Yes.
And then goes on to say the display captured in images of Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, her mouth wide open as she booed and gave a thumbs down to the president, and I would add, dressed like Cruella de Vil. Somebody said, caption this picture. And my caption is, the next one will be Dalmatians. You mark my word.
Yeah, that occurred to a lot of folks, and I never did find out what that was. That
reflected
costume.
The ethos that has come to define the Republican-led House, where an emboldened right wing that styles itself after former President Donald Trump is unapologetic about its antipathy for Mr. Biden and eager to show it in attention-grabbing ways. If the American people had been on that House floor listening to that speech, it would have been a lot worse names that I called them, said Ms. Greene, Republican of Georgia, who rose to yell liar at Biden repeatedly after he noted some Republicans favored a plan that could phase out Social Security.
Which they do.
And here's the part that struck me about this particular story, which is simply a factual recantation of what happened. Asked whether she was worried about being rebuked for her antics, she said, no, not one single bit. I have the Speaker's support and he has mine. That there is the problem.
Yeah. That's correct. Well identified. It used to be in the olden days there were rebukes for that kind of behavior.
Right, and they point out it's the latest example the Speaker struggles to control his unruly rank and file. A vocal subset of ultra-conservative Republicans has exacted steep concessions from McCarthy. They call him Mr. McCarthy. I can't. In exchange for supporting his bid for the speakership, and he has demonstrated repeatedly he's willing to cater to their whims to placate his party's base.
Whim caterer. A
whim caterer, indeed. And I could say worse things, too. The point, however, that the Times is making is that McCarthy doesn't have complete control over his folks. The point that other people made is, and that doesn't play well for them, and it really hurts them politically. This one is Politico magazine from John Harris, longtime observer. Republicans turn themselves into props for Biden. In a polarized era, the president retains far more power to frame the debate. That's something Newt Gingrich learned the hard way.
Yes.
Right? You think you have all this power in the House, and then you run up against the White House and realize, maybe not.
Oh, yeah. Right.
So Politico writes, in terms of pure theater, the jeers helped Biden. At the beginning of the address, and this is John Harris writing his opinion, Biden ambled through the House gallery, an 80-year-old president who looked not a day older or not a day younger than 80.
Well,
soon enough,
yes.
Rather than a painful evening, it became an entertaining one. This is the part that nobody could anticipate that was so entertaining. Otherwise, everybody would have watched. At least Biden was having fun, looking at booing Republicans with a smile. He accused, quote, some of my Republican friends, end quote, of wanting to sunset Social Security and Medicare, even as he acknowledged it. I'm not saying that as a majority who backs a proposal last year from Rick Scott. It was, in fact, a proposal from Rick Scott. It was a written proposal from somebody with a leadership-style position because he ran the Republican election committee.
He did.
Yeah.
Does he still? I don't know.
Well, I don't know.
I can't remember,
between
actually.
elections, so I don't know how active it is. Amid shouts of liar, Biden responded, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. As audible protests continued, Biden returned to the volley in seemingly spontaneous fashion. So, folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare are off the books now, right? All right, we got unanimity.
Yeah.
And so, he sort of backed them in a corner there. It's not like they're beholden and therefore trapped and they can't do anything about it. It's that they've admitted that, it's not a popular thing they're trying to do. So it's really hard to hide what they're doing.
Then they'll do it.
Right. This is another Times piece. Biden heads to Florida with a fresh political foil in House Republicans. Biden plans to use his visit to the University of Tampa to warn about what he says are Republican proposals to cut Medicare and Social Security. But Michael Scheer makes the point something else happened because of that State of the Union.
How?
Despite months of warning about MAGA Republicans, Mr. Biden had so far failed to make the threat seem real to voters. Numerous recent polls show Biden's support lagging, even among Democrats. We'll get to that in a moment. Strategists from both parties said the Republican outburst during his address to Congress and Mr. Biden's real-time exchange instantly crystallized on national television in front of millions of Americans what Biden had been struggling to say.
Yes, in a way. I mean,
when we talk about MAGA
that.
Republicans, we're talking about these people.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's a good illustration and a nice mild one too. That's not even nearly as crazy as they get.
Right. So Charlie Pierce picks up on that theme. Folks, Biden gave a hell of a speech walking McCarthy and crew into a bind. That's his title, the headline. And then the subheader is Republican hecklers underestimated his appetite for bare-knuckled politics. And the way Charlie describes it, and he's more of a no-holds-barred sort of guy than, let's say, the New York Times. We saw it again Tuesday night when President Joe Biden freight-trained his wackadoo of Republican opposition in the State of the Union address.
Okay.
He also flipped the very idea of the State of the Union on its head by turning it, and you'll recognize this, turning it into an American equivalent to the Prime Minister's question time in the British Parliament.
Yes.
Everybody who saw that said, "Oh, order!"
Right.
He wrapped him in a bear hug so warm they didn't realize they were being smothered. He took on hecklers like a veteran of a Catskills resort. He smiled, he laughed, he bellowed when it was called for. He had the only microphone, and he used it like a hammer. Predictably and laughably, the Republican opposition walked right into every clout. Marjorie Taylor Greene, dressed, as a friend of mine said, like the White Witch of Narnia, howled from the back benches. Speaker Kevin McCarthy was on camera as often as the president was, and we could all watch as the vice grips got progressively tighter. And that was true. Watching McCarthy was sort of amazing there. The parts that he didn't, we went over this in detail from, I think, Jennifer Bendery's tweet thread yesterday about all the times that McCarthy didn't stand up and cheer that you would have thought he would have. You know, we shot down the balloon. We beat China. Yeah. Okay. You know, and it was like, what are you doing? These are the parts that you stand up and cheer because it's good to show that you're a patriotic American.
Or at least politely clap in your seat. Jeez.
And as for the rest of the Angry Children's Caucus, writes Charlie Pierce, they hit all their marks and delivered their lines perfectly as the president led them merrily over the falls. For example, on infrastructure. And this was a great one. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet all over America. Urban, rural, tribal, and folks, we're just getting started, and I mean it sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in these districts. But don't worry, I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects, and I'll see you at the groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, what led to us discussing yesterday about recycling all those Let's Go Brandon things, or thanks, Brandon, because you can slap him everywhere, and his face is going to be everywhere. And his name is going to be everywhere.
Roll of those stickers on eBay somewhere, real cheap. I did that once. They used to put those on the gas pumps. We should stick them all over the infrastructure projects.
Right. The real party piece came when he dared to mention that the Republicans want to gut Social Security and Medicare, which in the case of Social Security has been a Republican goal since The Shadow was on the radio.
True.
He baited them, and then they went for it like starving carp, and then right on cue, the Republicans launched into a tantrum. The president hadn't been in politics since God was a boy. To miss an opportunity like that one in the Howard Cosell voice.
Easy.
Down goes McCarthy! Down goes McCarthy! Far from a conventional political address, there were very few oratorical bells and whistles. Instead, it was something akin to FDR's fireside chats, colloquial and intimate. So many sentences began with the word look. Everybody was addressed as folks.
That may be clear. Right.
More than anything else, its tone sounded like it had been drawn from a particularly energetic ward committee meeting down at the AOH hall. Best speech Joe Biden ever has given, because it was the most Joe Biden speech anybody has ever given. It was all him, aimed right at all of us, addressed to all of us, you know, folks.
Yeah.
And, you know, in his opinion, it worked. So here's this CNN post State of the Union flash poll. And what's interesting is I'll give you the post poll and then the pre-SOTU poll. In other words, they actually had measured this prior to in some fashion, and then this flash poll afterwards.
And we didn't know
Will
what the
Biden's
State of the
policies
Union
move America in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Yes.
Right direction, 71% after his speech, 52% beforehand. That's a big change.
Hey. Oh, yeah.
Right? Will Biden's economic policies move in the right or wrong direction? Right direction, 66, whereas it was 50% prior to. So he's moving this, 16, 19 points. That's a lot for a speech.
That is. It's unusual. I think it's unusual. Maybe it isn't, but
no, it certainly
unusual. Sounds
you don't
big.
normally see this.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just wondering, compared to other State of the Union measures like that. I mean, normally day to day, you'd say, "What the hell happened to move it 16 points in one direction?" But yeah, that's. I would imagine that it's probably no more than 4 or 5 typically, and that would be big.
Well, I don't have the crosstabs there. What you'd expect from looking at those numbers is basically he rallied Democrats and got a few independents.
You would think, but I mean, well, all right, great.
And Democrats are able to be rallied because their numbers at the moment aren't super high for him.
Right. So, maybe that's something. It's not like it doesn't mark any sort of great political awakening or anything like that, but it does.
If you get
the troops are
5%
roused.
more from indies, that's what you're looking for.
That's true.
Enough to win elections.
That'd be a winning coalition, certainly. And look, even if it's rallying the troops need to be rallied, and he did it. So okay.
Yeah. So okay. This one is from David Frum. How Biden
Really
successfully baited congressional Republicans. You're seeing a theme here.
Yes.
Right? And the point is, he did all of that. He had it planned. He executed it well. He pulled it off. He looked like he knew what he was doing. It's very difficult to say, well, he's senile and they have to do all his work. No, he was up there and he took you to the cleaners.
He ad-libbed and
he did it ad-libbing. And so,
right.
that tells you what you need to know.
Right, and it wasn't about you can call him DJ, CJ, either one. Not that kind of ad-libbing, ramming ramparts. It was coherent.
How Biden successfully baited congressional Republicans. The old man has learned some new tricks.
Are they?
The Joe Wilson thing shocked viewers in 2009, but more than a decade later, David Frum writes, that all seems quaint.
Yes.
Not only did Republicans repeatedly heckle, jeer, and shout during Biden's State of the Union, Biden was ready for them in impromptu remarks not included in the prepared text of the speech, and that's what impressed the reporters so much. They had the prepared text. They knew what he was going to say. This wasn't in it, so therefore, by definition, he was ad-libbing. I mean, you didn't need that in order to just watch it and see what was going on. You could tell. But,
who would write that in a speech?
It's the kind of thing that they can say, no, it's right here, and therefore I was correct.
Yeah. All right,
impromptu remarks not included in the prepared speech. Biden rolled with the interruptions, using them to reinforce his message. Biden accused some Republicans of plotting to sunset Social Security and Medicare. He knew exactly how they were going to react.
Mm-hmm.
How dare he? We already told him we rejected the thing we proposed.
Right.
And Biden said, all I'm saying is you guys proposed it. You calling me a liar because I'm telling you the truth?
I mean, it is interesting, given that the way they're using they use the same tactic all the time. If any Democrat or even somebody who says I once voted for a Democrat says I support something on Twitter, they call that Democrats proposing something. So
sure. When he got protests, he grinned and accepted them as a unanimous endorsement. Mm-hmm. And here's the part that I think gets a little bit underplayed, because this is how it plays to conservative independents and churchgoers. He grinned and accepted them as unanimous. I welcome all converts, he told them.
Yes.
Converts. Who is he referring to when he says converts?
Yeah,
well, he's
not really,
referring to anybody who in the Republican Party was going to even consider sunsetting Social Security, Medicare, and now won't. But he's really talking to the fact that I speak your language, you who go to church. You can vote for me, too. It's okay.
Yeah, I wasn't sure whether that was an intentional word choice.
Everything was
sounds good afterwards, certainly.
Recasting for the television audience the Republican hubbub as a sign of submission. Partisanship, populism, and patriotism were his themes. The speech was strewn with traps carefully constructed to ensnare opponents. He opened with a tribute to bipartisanship, but the mechanics of his address were based on shrewd and unapologetic hyper-partisanship. He anticipated negative reactions in the chamber and used them to reinforce his message.
I was struck by the fact that he actually did say the word Republican, which was studiously avoided in most cases by Barack Obama. It was driving everybody crazy. Say who it is. Don't say some in Congress. Don't say. Tell us.
All of this was wrapped in red, white, and blue invocations of American jobs, American democracy, American pride, American purpose.
America.
Garlanded with an impromptu taunt aimed at China's leader. That's why it was so remarkable. Again, that was on purpose, but it was also remarkable that he sort of forced McCarthy into a corner, because McCarthy really couldn't stand up and cheer all the time, because it would look like on TV he's standing up and cheering all the time. So what he did is make McCarthy say, what is this with American jobs and American democracy? I'm not into that. I'm not into American pride or purpose. I'm not going to cheer for that. And, that was brilliantly done. It was using the fact that McCarthy was over his shoulder. Biden knew exactly what he was doing when he did that.
Well, he sat there. The other chair, but I mean, he's got a sense of what goes on behind the speaker at a State of the Union. Not only having
he knows who's there, even if he doesn't know what they're doing. I mean, they could be, making devil horns and doing origami. He wouldn't know, but he knows who's there. He knows who's sitting there.
Yeah, well, he's been to a few of these things. So, he's sat in the audience. He's sat in the chair behind the guy. Now he's delivering them. He's everything but sitting on his hands like a judge. He's done.
Right. And then here's the Bulwark also picking up on the same theme. Nowadays, though, the House Republican Conference has a whole contingent of Joe Wilsons, boorish loudmouths whose lack of impulse control is only matched by their desire for attention. Don't hold your breath waiting for them to face a reprimand. You lie like objections without batting an eye or missing a line in his scripted remarks. That's not to say Biden didn't stumble a little. He did, as he typically fumbles somewhat. But Biden parried with the hecklers in the chamber during his hour-plus speech, and at what times felt like an impromptu, interactive performance, and he seemed to enjoy it too. One example, Biden pointed out that some Republicans wish to cut Social Security, which prompted boos. I'm glad to see. No, I tell you, I enjoy conversion.
Yeah, I remember it there. And I was wondering whether he was trying to say, I enjoy the conversation, but now that's an interesting argument that he did it on purpose, conversion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
He gave shout-outs to union members, teachers, talked about how public safety depends on public trust. Among his invited guests were Brandon Say, Paul Pelosi, parents of Tyree Nichols, whom he applauded for their grace and bravery. And he talked about Putin, and he talked about Ukraine, and all that stuff. Hoping that the consensus in Washington about Ukraine will last. And then Sarah Huckabee spoke for what Bulwark called a dreary 15 minutes, all scripted according to teleprompter, no audience. And, of course, it fell flat.
Yeah, well, it always does. And that's the problem with the response. Never give the response, because it's always
especially
all
when, you keep them waiting an hour.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great ploy all by itself. But even if it's brought off perfectly, the response, even when Democrats are giving it, it's impossible to follow that show. It's just crazy. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue. Okay, so by all accounts, a big, what was the line that kept coming back? Baiting, having baited the Republicans into a trap, masterfully designed. And I do note that it had to have been by design. I've never, I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen a Democratic president actually name his opponents in this setting. I mean, Obama was famous for not calling out Republicans by name, or by party name, and this was a dramatic change. So it seems like they did have this in mind. I don't know if he knew what kind of reaction he was going to get, but it's hard not to guess that if you take a look at the lineup.
Obama wanted to avoid a fight, and Biden was spoiling for one.
Yeah, well, they had very different approaches. I wonder what he thought of that one. We should need a Barack Obama op-ed discussion of the State of the Union. But only if it's good.
So while all of that was happening, that was
Yes.
Tuesday night, but what happened yesterday was sort of interesting as well.
What happened yesterday?
During the time that Twitter was falling apart and then coming back together, which I missed it because I was watching parts of the hearings in Congress about Twitter.
Yes, that's right. Maybe that's what wrecked it.
So they had a bunch of people who used to work for Twitter there to testify, and some really interesting things. This one is from the New York Times. Looks like it can actually give it as a gift, so anybody who wants can read it. Who knew?
Happy birthday, everyone.
Yeah, there you go.
5 takeaways as a gift.
This one is 5 takeaways from the House GOP hearing with former Twitter executives. The Oversight Committee called the session to scrutinize whether the social media platform has censored the right, but it yielded new revelations about the company's permissive approach, particularly towards Donald Trump.
Aha.
And whereas Representative James Comer, Republican of Kentucky and the chairman of the Oversight Panel, said Twitter aggressively suppressed conservative elected officials, journalists, and activists. He said it, but they couldn't prove it. What they could prove, because AOC was there and she did her homework, and she pinned down the people responsible for the monitoring of what goes on.
Yeah, they forget
and
that
said,
she's
okay,
there.
so there were a lot of people who were noting, my group, for example, the squad, were noting some of the really nasty things that Donald Trump was saying. For example, one of the things he said to us is, go back where you came from.
Yeah.
And
Famous.
Twitter had a policy, did it not? She asked the folks who had to say yes, because it was true when they were under oath. Didn't you have a policy that said that if you say to somebody, go back to where you came from, that's specifically against Twitter policy, and that will get you in trouble? It'll get you suspended, if not banned. And they said yes. And so AOC said, so then what did you do? Did you bring this to the attention of the higher-ups? And that person said yes. And AOC said, and what happened next? Isn't it true that after that you changed your policy? And they said yes. After that, we struck the part about saying that go back where you came from was bad, so now you were allowed to say it. And AOC said, so in other words, you are telling this committee you changed the policy to allow Donald Trump to stay there, and you became more permissive toward the right, not the left. You became more permissive allowing this to happen by changing the policy to allow it to fit what Trump was doing. Yes. So there goes Comer's entire committee. And after that, I think a lot of the Republicans left because they had gotten the soundbite they wanted for Fox that night, and there was no further purpose for the committee.
Right. Yeah, they may not have seen it, but I guess all the people watching the hearing did. So, yeah, they keep forgetting that she does do homework.
Right.
You're right.
Mr. Trump tried to get the model Chrissy Teigen censored for insulting him. Anika Collier-Navaroli, that was the person who was answering yes most of the time when AOC was questioning her. Former Twitter executive who was a whistleblower during the January 6th investigation recalled an incident from 2019 when a White House official tried to persuade the company to delete a tweet by the model Chrissy Teigen. She had insulted Mr. Trump in vulgar terms after he referred to her as filthy mouthed, and the Times published what she was
right.
May I read it?
It sounds like you're going to. Where's my censorship?
It's right there in the New York Times.
I know. It's. I'm just quoting the New York Times, everybody.
I'm quoting the New York Times when I say Ms. Teigen tweeted that Mr. Trump was a pussy-ass bitch who had avoided tagging her in his disparaging posts. In honor, Mr. President, she added. And then other people, went ahead and tweeted the exact tweet.
Okay.
That's the sanitized version.
It is? Oh. Wow, okay. Well,
they wanted it to come down because it was a derogatory statement directed at the president. So basically, they were trying to say that, Biden keeps telling Twitter to take stuff down. Actually, it's Trump. So everything that they tried to do in the committee, turns out it was the opposite. It was one of those opposite days.
Wow. Well, what a day, and what a day for reading out censorable material in the middle of a hearing about American values and family. Yeah, all these things. Right. We're supposed to be family friendly, but I also saw, and Murdery Trader Green got her 5 minutes and used it to interesting effect too. I think I recall seeing clips of it, her saying, I'm going to use all of my 5 minutes to rail, and she said it outright up front that she was going to just yell at the Twitter people for 5 minutes and not let them answer because they didn't let her answer when they banned her from Twitter. So she was going to...
Unfortunately, the parliamentarian ruled in her favor. I don't know if you saw that part.
No.
So she starts interrupting the witness. And Jamie Raskin said, you can't interrupt the witness. And she said, well, I'm using a point of personal privilege because they mentioned my name. And Raskin said, but they're testifying. Just because they mention your name doesn't give you the right to interrupt people who are testifying. And she said, well, you mentioned my name. And he said, I'm not testifying.
Well, that's true.
And so she appealed to the chair, and the chair talked to the parliamentarian, and the parliamentarian allowed her to interrupt the person who was testifying.
Wow.
And that's what happens when Congress changes hands.
That's right. You'll get fired as the committee parliamentarian. It's not the same parliamentarian who is the House parliamentarian.
Right. And so if you have a House committee, which is a Republican-dominated committee, you're going to have a parliamentarian who agrees with you. I just thought that was one of those interesting, this is how the House works kind of moments.
Yeah, and good idea to set an early precedent that there's no decorum rules that apply to Murdery Trader Green, so that she provides entertaining material.
I can do whatever I want. The speaker backs me, and I back him. I mean, what else do you need to know?
Right. Had she been ruled out of order, she probably just would have kept screaming.
How many divisions
and then
does
what?
the Pope have?
Yeah.
I mean, you and your stupid rules. You think your norms and rules are going to stop me from, doing this?
That's an important part, and I mean that's her shtick anyway. So yeah, keep that in mind because it'll happen again. And if the parliamentarian were to rule against her, that wouldn't matter. She'll just keep yelling, and at best,
then they'll vote on it.
Yeah, well, they'll vote on it, and then she'll say, "I'm threatening you all." With retribution. The MAGA troops will tear you all down if you vote to censure me in committee, on the floor, anywhere.
Right, so there are no rules. So it's one of those little tiny incidents that brings home the point.
Yes, I think that's right.
That Kevin McCarthy has no control over this group.
Yeah. So, you should mark this. Mark the day on your calendar. Right, yeah. No one will have any control. She'll threaten anybody who even hints at using the rules properly against her. And there, I don't even know exactly what the situation was. There are certainly points of personal privilege, although, I don't know that I would have agreed necessarily.
Well, she had announced that she's not going to let anybody speak because, they didn't let her speak.
I said I wasn't going to let anybody speak. Well, that doesn't mean the whole hearing is just you. You get 5 minutes. That's it.
Well, I'll appeal to the parliamentarian and they'll agree with me.
Well, maybe that's true.
So what are you going to do about it?
That there's not much that can be done as long if A, you either have a compliant parliamentarian or B, threaten their life all the time and they just
you had A. And she was certainly ready to do B, so there you have it. So you mentioned Caroline Bueno.
Yes.
She had she was following this.
I say Caroline and Bueno, if you ask me. But okay.
Caroline Bueno tweets under RVA Wonk.
Right.
Ex-Twitter employee Anika Navaroli, quote, Twitter's leadership broke their own rules in order to protect some of the most dangerous speech on the platform. After refusing to act repeatedly, I asked management whether they wanted more blood on their hands. Only then did they act. So, again, I don't understand why Comer thought this was going to be a hearing that was going to help him. It didn't.
He's dumb.
But, they are dumb. And basically, they understand what they're doing. They know what they're doing in terms of plan. Their plan is to get small sound bites they can use on Fox News. The stupid part is thinking that's enough. It's not. It's one of the reasons why they didn't do that well in the last election, and it's why Biden's going to be using them as a foil for the 2 years that they're there. And, I don't know how often they have to fail at this for them to understand that this isn't the smart way to proceed.
I don't know. Maybe they'll never get it, but yeah,
I'm thinking they'll never get it.
Yeah, it's often not a bad plan to simply say, well, we'll just get sound bites for use on Fox. And in our little cinematic universe, everything will have been a big win. But yeah, then you have to compete for votes in a general election, and it doesn't work. And if you take advantage of the Fox receptive audience, then you also are baited into doing dumb stuff like publishing plans to cut Social Security and Medicare.
Yeah.
So.
Anyway, other things in the news that I thought were worth mentioning. This is a really interesting piece by Jennifer Rubin. Part of the exhausted majority of voters, well, if you are or feel like you are,
yes,
you're not alone.
I am exhausted, and I am a voter.
A survey on political attitudes by the nonpartisan research group More in Common suggests we're going about our politics all wrong.
Oh, boy.
I sent you so much I don't remember if I sent this
I do
to
see
you,
it. Yes,
oh, good.
I got it.
Okay. The online poll of 1,200 people conducted after the midterms found that the 5 most common emotions toward the country today are frustration, disappointment, exhaustion, disgust, and anger.
That's some lineup.
Right? And Americans are slightly less angry than they were 5 years ago.
Really?
But also less hopeful and less willing to compromise on politics.
Okay. I'm less angry, but who
am
cares?
Too. I'm less angry because we won. But I'm also less willing to compromise on politics because I think they're fascists and they're showing it.
Oh, that's not in here. It just says less hopeful. But thank you for adding that.
Those in the exhausted majority, as More in Common terms it, have much in common with one another. 2/3 of respondents think the extremes are a threat to America. 90% think our biggest threats are domestic, and 60% think they have no voice in politics. The poll's margin of error is plus or minus 3, so those are big majorities. And while the parties are divided, they aren't split. Democrats perceive the top Republican issue to be election fraud, but only 19% of Republicans cite it as a top priority. In other words, Democrats think that Republicans are all Carrie Lake, but they're not.
I see. Well, I'm not saying it's a majority of you.
Cited as a top priority, and I hope she gets 19% in the next time she runs. More in Common found Republicans believe that Democrats are preoccupied with LGBTQ rights, and just 9% of Democrats listed as top priority.
Yeah.
Whereas voters on both sides rank the economy and health care as the most important issues, that which we used to call kitchen table issues.
Yeah. Well, one side is performing on them, and
infrastructure. One side is performing, the other isn't, and that's like a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this survey arrives at a time when voters believe incorrectly that the U.S. is in recession, and this tells us something about how voters form their dismal views about politics. It's easy to place at least some blame on social media platforms.
All right,
Too often, mainstream news outlets simply regurgitate inflammatory remarks from Tucker Carlson, but the media also have their own innate bias for gloom and doom. This is the part I found interesting. This is something I complain about all the time when I watch the evening news.
All right.
Right?
Yeah.
And inflation and gas prices are up. Well, how about inflation is down and gas prices are down? Moving on to the next topic. The media have their own innate bias for gloom and doom. This is well-researched, and it's understandable. A 2019 study suggested negativity in news is a product of a human tendency to be more attentive to negative news content. In the competition for viewers and readers, it's not surprising that news coverage gets more and more negative with time. Let's face it, the U.S. economy is improving, but that's not as click-worthy as economic troubles remain. And, we complain about that all the time with the New York Times.
Sure.
Great economic report. However, it might change.
Right. You may lose regardless.
Why did you add the however it might change? Because we get more clicks that way.
Yeah.
Rising gas prices can dominate headlines for weeks, but coverage of declining gas prices is sporadic. And the more news we imbibe, especially during a crisis like COVID or January 6th, the more dire things seem. In search of explanations or relief, we may compound our misery by soaking in more negative news. That's why sometimes it's good to turn off cable. Moreover, if one party deliberately tries to arouse grievance, fear, and resentment, a mainstream news outlet, in the name of balance, will pick up a disproportionate amount of negative rhetoric. All this helps explain why most people think everything is worse today when it really isn't. And there are objective reasons for Americans to feel nervous, even alarmed about the state of the country, but there's no need to marinate in it. People might appreciate some optimism from politicians. More in Common says, Americans are eager for a departure from the us versus them narratives. And by the way, you'll note that Biden hit all those themes.
Yes.
People don't like to give him credit for doing things that he's doing, and that's one of the things he's doing. More Americans are becoming engaged in civic life, and that could be good for the country and for our collective mood. So Biden is doing the thing he said he was going to do, that he campaigned on, that he said he's running on, and that is like, let's get back to normal here.
Yes.
All right. So what's Biden supposed to do about it? He's doing everything he's supposed to. In fact, he's hitting all the right notes. And, people don't like to give him credit because, he's Biden and, it's boring.
Yeah.
But the fact is, he's doing what you have to do in order to get the vast majority of people. And this fits in really well with the discussion we had the other day about looking at individual Republican House districts and how they're constructed. And how, there might be a majority for being normal and doing good things, but it's still divided within the Republicans. Whereas if you just go in on culture war stuff, they're united. And so Republicans are going to do that regardless of the fact that there might well be, people who agree with the Democrats on stuff. And that's why it's a Democrat's job to say, you guys need to be isolated over there. Sure, 30% of you are going to be we can't even discuss things with you.
Mm-hmm.
But that still leaves a healthy amount where we could pick off 1 or 2 or maybe 3% or more, and we're going to go for that. And that's the strategy, and that's what they do.
Okay. Well, if they can pick off a couple percentage points in the electorate, that works every 2 years. If we can pick off a couple percentage points on a daily basis, we could actually stop some really bad stuff or win some votes.
Yeah, the sooner and the more, the better.
Let's start.
Another thing that came out, which was quite interesting, is research on Christian nationalism from the PRRI poll, which is always very good, looking at religion in U.S. life. Brief thread of the findings here from Ian Huff. Mm-hmm. The Christian nationalism scale, the percent who are adherents of Christian nationalism, 10%, sympathizers, 19%, total 29%.
Okay.
So, 30% of the country are you can't talk to them.
Well.
This is based on a new measure we developed to identify people who believe in Christian nationalism by assessing their agreement with these 5 statements and sorting them into one of the groups.
Everybody's using 5 these days.
The U.S. government should declare America a Christian nation. U.S. law should be based on Christian values. If the U.S. moves away from our Christian foundations, we won't have a country anymore. Being Christian is an important part of being American. God has called Christians to exercise dominion over all areas of American society. That's why you will occasionally see them referred to as dominionists. They're not really Christian nationalists, they're dominionists. It's the same thing.
Okay, well that explains the terminology.
We find that Christian nationalist beliefs are overwhelmingly among 2 key groups, white evangelical Protestants and Republicans.
Yeah.
Okay. Adherents, 29% of white evangelical Protestants, but another 35% are sympathizers. Mm-hmm. And so that's a big deal.
Yes.
Jewish groups, for example, 2%.
Yeah, there's not a lot of, Christian nationalism among the Jewish voters?
Yeah. Most 61% are rejectors, and 31% are skeptics in the Jewish population. Other non-Christian religious, as many as 7% are adherents.
Okay.
Well, interestingly, if you look at Hispanic Catholic, 6% adherents. Not very much.
Huh.
Right, so you're really talking about white evangelical Protestants.
Yes.
Which is really kind of interesting. And then if you look at Christian nationalism by political affiliation, adherents, 21% Republicans, but 33% are sympathizers. That's 54%. That's a majority. Whereas independents, it's only 6% adherents and 17% sympathizers. So independents in this case really are not like Republicans. They're like Democrats.
Well, that's new.
Now, most of the adherents trust far-right news even more at 38% than they trust Fox News at 20%.
Oh. Huh. Oh, for adherents. Yes, right.
For
okay.
adherents.
Yeah, I got you. All right.
Right. For the sympathizers, they also prefer far-right news to Fox News. So Fox News isn't right enough for them.
That'd be interesting.
Right.
To see
Tucker
them
Carlson is a moderate to them. Just to give you an idea where they stand.
He's sort of the bridge between Fox and the rest of them. But all right.
And Jack Jenkins, who covers this for Religious Dispatch and other places, RNS service. Interesting, he says, new PRRI data closely matches Pew's Faith and Flag conservatives, which Pew said is their attempt to quantify Christian nationalism, which places the hardliners at about 10% of the population. and a much larger part of the GOP, and they're among the most politically active.
Interesting. And competing labels, people looking to write books, and it's
right, soccer moms versus,
football families.
Security dads.
I don't know, right. They're describing the same phenomenon with a different name. That is interesting. So Christian nationalists versus what flag and...
Faith and flag
Faith and flag conservatives. Yeah. All right, well...
So the general public, that's 10%, but Republicans is 23%.
Yes, well... Republicans are worse Americans.
Right. So, again, there's a certain group that you are not going to be able to reach and you're not going to be able to talk to, and you shouldn't bother. But it's really a small percent of the population, and even amongst Republicans, it's larger than the population as a whole, but it's still by no means a majority.
Well, that's good. And I'm not saying it's a majority.
And that's who's running the House of Representatives. And that's why, I think it's important to bring up.
That's
who Marjorie Taylor Greene represents.
And that's, to relate that back to Biden and his State of the Union, right, where he says these radical proposals. I'm not saying it's the majority of you, but had he been able to, finish a sentence, he might have been able to say.
And for those of you who are tuned in to words, I welcome conversion.
Right. And, it's not a majority of you. It's not a majority of rank and file, just Republican voters. But you should know that it's disproportionately the position of the people here in this room that you sent to represent you and who claim to speak for the Republican Party. They do want to do these things. That now they're caught and they say they don't want to. But like I said, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. But, the adherents, as they're called in these two approaches, even though they also hang some other labels on them, are overrepresented in Congress, which is a enormous problem, and why Kevin McCarthy has no control over them.
Here's another one if you want to look at it that way. Again, this is PRRI, Christian Nationalism Survey, and they have 10% of their adherents. Mm-hmm. Okay, and comparison of list experiment and Christian nationalism scale. Well, let's just look at the Christian nationalism scale for now. We'll ignore the list experiment. Here's the statement. The United States is a white Christian nation, and I'm willing to fight to keep it that way.
Oof. Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, no working with them.
29% total. 10% adherents, 19% sympathizers agree with that statement.
Well, they're going to get punched.
Well, they're represented in the United States Congress.
Yeah.
Well, and that means that people within the United States House, in particular, on the Republican side, Paul Gosar, Marjorie Taylor Greene,
right,
are these people.
They are.
They not only represent them, they are them.
And they're not.
So, again, Kevin
those
McCarthy has problems.
Names.
We have problems. And so, to a certain extent, that's why Biden says you don't negotiate with terrorists.
Yeah. Well, that's what they should be doing, and that's
their
who they
goal
are.
is to disrupt, and therefore that's why they can't just say, okay, here's what our goals are. Mm-hmm. You can't.
All right.
You can't, because if you said it out loud, it would be, we want to disrupt everything and make the government fail.
I guess so, yeah. And that doesn't even seem to be that I would think it would not resonate with all of that many adherents either. I think there's probably subgroups within the adherents group, one part trained by, and brought in by Donald Trump, who really do say, I just want things to be crazy and chaotic. But there's got to be some Christian nationalists who have they're bad choices, but who have policy preferences and must think, well, I actually want to govern this way. I don't want to just yell. There's nothing particularly Christian or even nationalist about just yelling about, I'm angry at a person. Well, when are we going to get policies that embody this? Except the Marjorie Taylor Greenes among them don't have any, actual policy chops. So I don't know. Maybe one day they would be replaced. I don't know. Maybe chaos is enough.
Weird.
So yes,
let me just throw this in at the end here. This is crossed by Transom from Vance Ulrich, who follows things California. Was looking to see, again, what are the effects of all of this, whether it's State of the Union, whether it's January 6th, what's the effect of all of this on like real life?
What is it?
So he said he just got the voter file numbers in heavily Latino San Bernardino County in California.
Okay.
All right.
Heavily Latino. All right.
Heavily Latino. And in 2020, the electorate was 42% Democrat, 33% Republican, 25% other. So D plus 9 in 2020. Mm-hmm. In 2022, it was D plus 2 electorate.
Wow.
Because what happened is people shifted from other to Republican. They went from 33% Republican in 2020 to 39% Republican in 2022. And you heard all these stories about how Latinos are becoming Republicans.
Yes.
Now.
I guess they are.
Now, registration, 41% Democrat, 29% Republican, 30% other. That's D plus 10.
What?
And he said, based on this, we're going to see massive swings in 24 in heavily Latino districts, and they're going to be in the Democrats' favor.
Oh, are they? Okay.
That's what he's predicting based on what he's seeing. And, again, this is like Tom Bonnier in the early vote. People poo-poo it and say, oh, it doesn't really mean that much. Well, it might mean a lot. We'll have to wait and see.
So he's calling
So he's following
current
voter registration, and he's saying what's
as,
happening is that people are leaving the Republican Party and they're registering as other.
But they're really like yo-yoing quickly. Because I was looking at like 2022 electorate. Oh no, we're stuck with a trending Republican electorate in these heavily Latino counties. And
yeah,
he's saying,
just in a few months, they saw what they saw and they don't like what they see, and they're no. I mean, they may not become Democrats. That was never really going to be the case. When you leave the Republican Party, you become an independent.
I mean, that's
even
right.
some of our favorite Never-Trumpers aren't Democrats.
Yeah.
Whether it's David Jolly or whether it's Tom Nichols or Tim Miller. You name a Never-Trump Republican that you enjoy reading or hearing about. None of them are Democrats. Michael Steele, none of them. They're all independents. That's what happens.
Yeah. All right. Is that what's happening with these folks?
And he predicts that's what's happening here.
Okay. Well, I mean, it didn't make a great deal of sense that they would have swung toward Republicans for 2022 either.
He thinks that part of the problem with the electorate in 2022 is that the Democrats never did any get out the vote in advertising.
Oh. Well, okay.
And
that's at least an
but even without that,
problem.
Things are shifting in Democrats' direction anyway, so he expects a big year in 2024.
Okay. Well, big push then. Thanks, Greg. All right. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. So very many things to catch up on. Why don't we start with, going back to, we'll do Caroline or Bueno again for the second time today, but also our second pass at yesterday's tweet thread. Yesterday, I was telling you about I was telling you that she was telling you that she had just published a paper about Russian involvement in the truck convoy in Canada last year. And after having read the story from OCCRP about the overt, I think, program of essentially, sponsoring and maybe paying off European politicians in order to get them to take pro-Russian positions, either in placing articles in journals and newspapers and magazines in their home countries, or even bringing resolutions to their various legislative bodies to recognize the annexation of Crimea or drop sanctions against Russians that had been imposed as a result of the annexation, etc., etc. So direct involvement. We read a week or two ago about the weird connection between the Russian far right and the far right in Spain that went up to and included the far-right actors in Russia acting out in Spain, like taking up the causes of right-wingers in Spain and targeting their local Spanish politicians whom they opposed and cutting out the middleman and sending them the bombs themselves. And then, of course, we started reading this one that intimated that there was some connection between the Russians and the truck convoy in Canada. However, and she documents the cross-pollination in terms of the agitation, in some cases, the channels of organization, etc., including the fact that certain Telegram channels had been set up as group chats among the organizers of the convoy, but then when the convoy was over, the channels were still there. What happened to the channels? Mysteriously, they began filling up with not only pro-Russian propaganda, but pro-Russian propaganda in the Russian language, which suggests that maybe regular Canadian truckers weren't running the whole thing to begin with. They may have been populating the site organically once they were channeled into it, but it was never under their control, it appears. Anyway, I read through most of that, and let's see, we ran out of time right at a critical moment, really, as it turns out, when I went back and read the conclusion of the thread. So that's why I wanted to return to it. I know we had read about the strange imbalance among the networks who were reporting on the Canadian truck convoy, that for some reason RT was fascinated by this. Oh, and also, was someone for some reason filled up their Telegram channel with Russian language content afterwards. You get the idea that the Russians are all over this. Now, there was also, we looked at the strange word clouds from among different media outlets and who was concentrating on the convoy and what else were they talking about at the time, and that the word cloud for RT was unusual in the confluence of discussion of the convoy, but also NATO and Ukraine and Nazis for some reason figuring prominently in those word clouds. And I believe we read this part too here, where she says, but this is a good jumping off point. I also looked at RT's online coverage of the truck convoy. I found that RT.com published 250 plus articles about the truck convoy and the linguistic patterns. Repetitive uses of specific words and phrases were suggestive of international language guidance, which is a tactic RT is known to use. The tone of coverage, and we should probably read a little bit about internal language guidance in her report and get some better understanding of exactly what that is. But the tone of coverage was sympathetic, of course, towards convoy organizers and participants, portraying them as victims of a, quote, tyrannical government. I also looked at the convoy coverage on Russian proxy sites linked to Russian intel agencies. You should see her article for more information on those. These sites occupy an intermediate role between the pillars of the ecosystem with clear links to Russia and those that are meant to be fully deniable. Specifically, she says, I looked at Global Research and Southfront, two websites associated with Russian actors, I guess here, both of which produce ongoing coverage of the convoy that often included disinformation and inflammatory rhetoric, plus repeated calls for Trudeau to step down. I also looked at the Telegram channels, right? That's where the interesting point came up, that they eventually flipped over to becoming repositories for Russian propaganda, including Kremlin press releases and Russian language content. As I noted in the paper, many of the prominent conspiracy theories that circulated in these Telegram channels, including accusations about Canada supporting Nazis in Ukraine, are aligned with Russia's justifications for invading Ukraine. And you might wonder at that point, were there a lot of Canadian truckers protesting vaccine mandates and mask mandates and COVID lockdowns who really thought, well, the real problem in the world is so many Nazis in Ukraine and the Canadian government's support for them? That was not a prominent feature, as far as I could tell, of the convoy here or there. Now, tactically, because remember we had our own versions of the convoys, tactically the strategies seen in these truck convoy / Russian propaganda channels, multilingual posting, repurposing channels, cross-platform coordination, etc., have previously been associated with influence campaigns. So there's an alignment with content and with tactics. Now, this is where what we really should have included yesterday. So what does this all mean? Well, for one thing, as I noted in the paper, Caroline says, it does not mean by itself that Russia was behind the truck convoy. The convoy was a homegrown movement, an extension of anti-lockdown and anti-vaccine protests, which themselves, though, grew out of, this is an interesting point, grew out of the Yellow Vest movement. You remember them? I wondered a while ago, what has been happening? Whatever happened to that thing? We read a couple of interesting articles about the Yellow Vest movement, and it was a weird kind of protest that didn't quite fit the right, pattern for a completely organic movement. But I think the argument here is the two movements themselves, the origins of the movements are organic, but what the Russians appear very interested and somewhat adept at doing is identifying where there is disruptive protest going on and ingratiating themselves in various ways into the movement, and then slowly injecting rhetoric into it, hoping to guide, to use the fracture to sow yet more chaos in the situation. I'm just wondering whether we should read the little screenshot that she grabbed from the paper here. Might be helpful in explaining things. Before looking at Russia's involvement in the far-right truck convoy, it's important to emphasize that this movement didn't appear out of thin air, nor was it shipped over from Russia. The organizers, tactics, networks, and ideology behind the 2022 Freedom Convoy are a direct outgrowth of the anti-lockdown protests, which themselves spawned from Canada's, not France's, but I'm sure it was copied from France, the Yellow Vest movement, and the United We Roll convoy. Underneath all of these seemingly distinct movements is a rising tide of right-wing populism, infused with a toxic blend of conspiracy theories, disinformation, grievances, and scapegoating that is now dominating political narratives and leading to increasingly inflammatory rhetoric that at times has spilled over into violence. The truck convoy, therefore, doesn't represent a new movement in Canada, but rather a new method drawing upon old grievances. However, as evidenced by examples such as Black Lives Matter in the U.S. and the Yellow Vests in France, Russia views homegrown protest movements like this as an opportunity to exacerbate social divides and sow discord as part of its asymmetric assault on Western democracies. That is a very interesting and important point. Now, she continues with the tweet thread, but as we've seen with protest movements around the world, Russia views domestic protest and extremist movements as vehicles for their asymmetric assault on Western democracies. They amplify movements like the truck convoy to fracture Western societies and promote civil unrest. It was also interesting to see Russia make attempts to cultivate support among convoy organizers and participants via interviews and human interest stories to get them to share RT's content organically, a tactic that has been widely used in influence campaigns run by China. Interesting, and there's basically, there's a couple of screenshots here from RT, and I don't know exactly. I mean, I guess the idea here is hosting the movement leaders, the protest leaders on RT shows, and then, of course, providing them with links to here's your segment, but, on the RT website, might lead them to share other RT content without prompting them, that is to say, more organically, by simply exposing them to it by parking a copy of something they'd be interested in on RT, And then they come by, and then you start finding them sharing RT content with one another on the Telegram channels, etc., and then further spreading into the rest of social media. Now, she says, in summary, the study documents Russian influence activities in multiple channels, from overt state-funded propaganda outlets to proxy websites to social media. It's the first study providing quantifiable evidence of Russia's involvement in the convoy, and it demonstrates a strategic interest in the convoy on the part of Russia, which itself should be of interest to Canada. It has also motivated at least Russian propagandists / former RT employees to write an article libeling me. So, no link to that one, and deservedly so, but very interesting backlash in the meantime. I wanted to go back to the third to last of these tweets here has more screen grabs from her studies. I guess a continuation of the reading that we gave before, which explained that as with BLM in the U.S. and the Yellow Vests in France, Russia views homegrown protest movements as an opportunity to exacerbate social divides and sow discord. Russia's involvement in domestic protest movements around the world has included activities such as starting local activist groups, organizing rallies. We remember this from Facebook activities in the 2016 campaign, right? Coordinating funding, producing and amplifying media reports, creating deceptive social media personas, and more. That, of course, from the U.S. Department of Justice's own review of the situation in 2019. Russian operatives often work with both sides of divisive issues by providing support for protesters while also inciting violence against them, and by organizing dueling rallies. And there is ample evidence of Russia's involvement in far-right movements around the world. We just read it about what was going on in Spain, right? But it's everywhere. From the National Front in France to the Northern League in Italy. And does that ring a bell for everyone? Northern League. If it doesn't ring a bell because you're not thinking in terms of Italian cognates, Lega Nord, Northern League. Remember the Italian regional politicians Valde Gambieri that we were reading about from the OCCP report the other day, twice, right? Northern League is Lega Nord. That's the party they're talking about. So the National Front in France, the Le Pens, Lega Nord in Italy, to the Alternative for Germany. Maybe you recognize them as the AfD party. That also the acronym, or I guess it's not really an acronym, but the abbreviation used, also mentioned in the OCCRP article we read the other day. And there's more. Russia's ruling party has established formal and informal ties with ultranationalist movements across Europe. As part of this effort to destabilize Europe and weaken the European Union, Brexit, etc., destabilize Europe, basically the entire contents of the conversation between the then Ukrainian Prime Minister and the Republican leadership in June of 2016, when he showed up to warn them that this wasn't just targeting Ukraine, it was targeting all Western democracies. And then Kevin McCarthy said, I think Putin pays Trump. And then everybody forgot about the contents of the conversation and forgot about Ukraine again until we had to impeach Donald Trump over his blackmailing of the wrong side in all of this, by the way. Anyway, as part of this effort to destabilize Europe and weaken the European Union, the Kremlin has provided financial support to far-right political parties and NGOs, organized networking events like Everybody Come to Yalta, right? Meetings and cultural and religious exchanges for leaders of far-right movements. And, oh, by the way, if you think, well, it's just different there in Europe, they have actual Nazi-ish parties still in the Lega Nord and the National Front and AfD, and wasn't it FPO in Austria, etc. And they invite those people to come to Yalta and to tour Moscow. Not like here in the United States where we have two sides of the same coin, middle-of-the-road parties. Now, actually, a large delegation of Republicans invited to Moscow famously over the 4th of July, which was a huge PR coup and still comes up. And they still use and we still use. And I guess the Republican Party was far right enough for Moscow to say, well, we'll invite them alongside the Northern League and the National Front and the Alternative for Germany. Interesting. Not what she's saying here, but that's what I'm saying. Let's see, where do we leave off here? Right, they're organizing all of these trips and events and meetings and cultural and religious exchanges, and Russia has leveraged its expansive state-funded propaganda machine to attack opponents of European far-right politicians, inflame tensions around social issues, and spread disinformation to chip away at the foundation of democratic societies. Russia's activities have helped fuel a rising tide of far-right populism that has sparked mass protests and civil unrest, and that's what they're doing specifically here in this article about the convoy, surrounding issues like immigration and vaccines, and energized far-right extremist movements in Europe, North America, and elsewhere. Members of extremist groups such as Atomwaffen, also the last couple of days some discussion of Atomwaffen, the Base, which I think we brought that up recently as well. Now that I think about it, they too have been mentioned on the show in the last week or so. And the Russian Imperial Movement, which also got a mention in the Spain story, right? They were the group that did the work on behalf of the Spanish far right. It was the Russian Imperial Movement, all of which are listed terrorist entities in Canada, by the way, have reportedly trained in Russia while carrying out attacks in the U.S. and Canada. And Russian disinformation campaigns have been cited as a contributing factor in pandemic-related protests, extremist activities, and unrest. Like, yikes, all sort of coming together in one thread. All right. Well, now I've updated you on what Caroline Orbueno had to say, at least in that thread. And we've got that done. And let's see. So I do have some more things to throw into the mix here. This one, we'll get off of the direct connection to Russia thing now, and we'll only have speculative connection to Russia and elsewhere. An interesting new channel that may be available to them or they may already be using. But it's interesting. It harkens back to the 2016 awareness of Eastern European, if not Russian necessarily, organizations, loosely based, and sometimes down to teenage hackers in Romania and other Eastern Europeans, former satellite states of the Soviet Union, which one? Macedonian, right? I think we're thinking of the Macedonian teenagers who put together the original real fake news sites, real fake news, not the fake news. Well, at any rate, it now suggests here in this article in the Pointer magazine, pointer.org, that this becomes easier thanks to the latest rage for ChatGPT. There are the initials that I forgot. The artificial intelligence chatbot, ChatGPT, that everybody's talking about. Check out how easy it becomes now to set up an operation like that. One of the things I think that was perhaps problematic about disguising such sites well enough as real news sites was providing the content. You had to generate a tremendous amount of content in order for it to look like it was a legit site, and that's kind of labor intensive, which I think might actually, I don't know which one's which, chicken or egg, but I think that might be why those things tended to be generated in Eastern Europe, where the labor cost was cheaper and you could pay people less to generate that content for you. But now you don't have to pay anybody because ChatGPT will do it for you. Pointer says, this newspaper doesn't exist. How ChatGPT can launch fake news sites in minutes. It used to take an awful lot of preparation to put one of these things together. A buzzy new AI tool can quickly create entire news organizations out of thin air. Should we be freaking out? Maybe. Although one of the things, I don't know how inherently successful it would be. One of the limitations in creating a fake news site was that you needed to have enough content to look real, and the quicker the better, if you wanted to become effective sooner and affect the outcome of an election, which had an end date. And so I think one of the ways that they did it was to aggregate real news from real sites, or at least from other fake sites, and then seed it with your new fake content that you could generate at whatever pace you could generate it. And it had the side effect of, I think, increasing vulnerability to the site, because people would read it and say, this either looks like a real story or it is a real story. I recognize it from somewhere else, or it was even credited to somewhere else. And so you got the feeling, well, this is a news aggregation site, but they're taking from at least some sources that I recognize. And these other things that come from sources I don't recognize, well, maybe I just, I don't know every place. And you were then more receptive to the garbage that they were generating. But now you can generate garbage from top to bottom very quickly. Alex Mahadevan, I hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly, is the author behind this piece at Pointer, and begins this way. Michael Martinez, managing editor of the Suncoast Sentinel, is a foodie who loves jazz, volunteers at local homeless shelters, and spends his days hiking in Florida's state parks. One problem? Just one. Neither Martinez nor the Suncoast Sentinel exist. In less than half an hour, and with just a few sentences of input, the buzzy AI text generator ChatGPT spits out details about Martinez, that he's worked in journalism for 15 years and has a reputation for being a strong leader, an excellent mentor, and a masthead of reporters, editors, and a photographer for the non-existent Suncoast Sentinel. How interesting. And here, embedded in the story, is a visualization, a video essentially, of the requests being made to the chatbot. Give me a bio for a managing editor, make it more detailed, etc. And here's what gets spit out. Well, wow. Okay, I am freaked out, tweeted former White House official Tim Wu, who coined the term net neutrality in 2003. I guess that's still dining out on that one anyway. When I posted my first attempt at made-up newspapers with ChatGPT. Now, I'm always skeptical about tech freakouts, but in just a few hours, anyone with minimal coding ability and an axe to grind could launch networks of false local news sites with plausible but fake news items, staff, and editorial policies using ChatGPT. Here's how it works from my colleague Seth Smalley, who I guess published an article on a similar subject in Pointer. The technology works by sifting through the internet, accessing vast quantities of information, processing it, and using artificial intelligence to generate new content from user prompts. Users can ask it to produce almost any kind of text-based content. And I think we've all seen that illustrated on social media lately and gotten some idea of what the capabilities are. Political operatives, lobbyists, and ad dollar chasing grifters have launched dubious news sites, referred to as pink slime, in relatively short order without using a tool like ChatGPT. Some hired contractors in the Philippines to produce stories, while others used algorithms, the foundation of AI, to generate hundreds of articles based on government databases, said Priyajana Bengani, senior research fellow at the TOW Center, TOW Center at Columbia Journalism School, who studies these so-called pink slime networks. Are the barriers to entry getting lower? The answer is yes, Bengani said. Not Benghazi, Bengani. Now, anybody sitting anywhere can spin one of these things up. In about 2 minutes, while juggling other tasks, I used This person does not exist.com, another AI tool, to generate headshots for Martinez. Editor-in-chief Sarah Johnson, copy editor Sarah Nguyen, photographer Jennifer Davis, and others. Shining a light on St. Petersburg was ChatGPT's first crack at a slogan for the Suncoast Sentinel. It spit out, uncovering the stories that matter in St. Petersburg, when I asked for something a little more exciting. It wrote me editorial and corrections policies, a couple letters to the editor, and several totally fabricated articles about new local art galleries and Business Boost, a fake app developed by fake St. Petersburg entrepreneurs. So it's pretty comprehensive in what it can produce, and of course, at no labor cost, and of course, much quicker than actual labor would be able to produce it anyway. Pretty scary. It generated an article accusing local officials of rigging the election, and an article alleging the mayor ran a no-bid scheme in one of the biggest redevelopment projects in the area's history. I even asked ChatGPT to generate the HTML code for the home page of this burgeoning fake newspaper, and it complied. You don't even have to do that work.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with reading this Pointer article about how easy chatbots, ChatGPT in particular, makes it now to quickly start up and populate a fake news site pretty much all by yourself. I'm astonished by this part. I don't think I fully realized how capable the chatbot was. Sure, you can have it generate the content for all of these stories, or fill out profiles, or even have another AI tool generate headshots for the people who are the fake people who are supposedly populating your fake newspaper. But you still have to have at least minimal coding skills to be able to put the website itself together, unless you can ask ChatGPT to do that too. And that's what happened here. I even asked ChatGPT to generate the HTML code for the homepage for this burgeoning fake newspaper, and it complied. And it gave me a starting point for more complex JavaScript code to make the fake site, quote, sexy and interactive. Its results weren't flawless. It got the name of the mayor wrong twice. There have been a few elections since Rick Baker was in office, bot, in case you were wondering. And as you can see with Martinez's bio, ChatGPT generates ridiculously boring copy. I don't think it's going to be transformative overnight, said Bengani, noting that the media, yes, me included, also freaked out about deep fakes 2 years ago, and Dolly, D with D-A-L-L-E, Dolly last year. I think I missed that freak out entirely. We've yet to see an impactful disinformation campaign materialize from either. The highly publicized deep fake of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was quickly debunked. The model doesn't update in real time and can't provide specific details that the locals who would be affected by an issue would look for in a story. For example, ChatGPT wouldn't provide the size or cost of the redevelopment project I used in my experiment. Going back to the false business story I created, you can see the cracks in ChatGPT that would make an editor cringe or tear their hair out. Here's a paragraph from the so-called story. The founders of the company, brothers Tom and Jerry... Tom and Jerry Lee. All right, yeah. I see what you're talking about. Were inspired to create the app after seeing, and maybe that's not even what they're talking about, but it strikes me as pretty funny just because it's Tom and Jerry. But okay, I'll start over. The founders of the company, brothers Tom and Jerry Lee, were inspired to create the app after seeing the struggles of small business owners in the St. Petersburg area. They saw a need for an affordable and accessible solution that would help these business owners compete in today's fast-paced business environment. Boring, but nothing wrong with it so far. Small business owners are the backbone of our local economy, said Tom Lee. We wanted to create a tool that would help them succeed, and that's exactly what Business Boost does. I don't know. I think that could pass muster in many places. It reads like a student skimmed the pages of the Wall Street Journal for business buzzwords and regurgitated them out with a couple of fake names and a hilariously ill-conceived business. But that is kind of how ChatGPT works, right? Yeah, I guess so. To defend against ChatGPT's potential use as a tool for misinformation, among other malicious uses, OpenAI has already launched a classifier to identify AI-generated text. I laughed out loud when I plugged in some chunks of this experiment and received, the classifier considers the text to be possibly AI-generated. Okay. Still, as director of Pointer's digital media literacy initiative MediaWise, I know that most people judge a news website, quote-unquote news website, based on how legitimate it looks, including its bylines and web design. That may have been at least a semi-reliable measure in the past, but with ChatGPT, for example, it's simple to launch a false news site that satisfies all those signals. Previously, a well-written, well-laid-out publication with headshots and bylines, etc., meant something, said Mike Caulfield, a research scientist at the University of Washington Center for an Informed Public, who teaches media literacy tactics in a Twitter message. He teaches them probably in a classroom, but he said this in a Twitter message, by the way, in case you didn't get that. Anyway, it didn't always mean it was reputable, but there was at least a partial correlation between something looking that way and being known or real, even if real and wrong. Signs of authority were expensive, and that formed a barrier to entry. In many schools across the U.S., teachers use outdated methods in identifying sketchy websites, said Caulfield, who has an upcoming book with Stanford History Education Group founder Sam Weinberg that includes a chapter on these issues. These methods are mostly useless when it comes to AI-generated plausible false news organizations. What has happened over the past 30 years is that the formerly expensive signals, the ones that focused on surface features, have become incredibly cheap, he said. But we are still teaching students to look for those signals. It's a massive disaster in the making. Lateral reading, one of the foundational media literacy techniques developed by SHEG and taught by MediaWise, encourages users to leave a website and use a search engine to find out more about the news outlet or other organization instead of relying on the website's About Us page or masthead, for example. Bengani suggests copying and pasting text from potential pink slime websites into Google to look for plagiarism, a major red flag in identifying these networks. OpenAI didn't respond to a request for comment, but when I asked ChatGPT about how AI like itself could impact the informational ecosystem, it replied, generated content can easily spread misinformation, especially if it is not thoroughly fact-checked or if it is generated with biased or inaccurate data. Additionally, the ease with which AI can generate large volumes of content can make it difficult for users to determine the credibility of a source. This can make it easier for false or misleading information to spread, potentially undermining public trust in journalism and information as a whole. I'm reading this as if this is a definition you should trust. It was generated by the AI chatbot, though. And it continues. It's important for AI models like me to be used responsibly and in accordance with ethical guidelines, such as providing balanced and fair reporting and protecting the privacy and dignity of sources and subjects, even if they're fake, I guess. Additionally, it's important for news organizations to fact-check and verify all information before publishing it, whether it was generated by AI or not. ChatGPT's complicated relationship with journalism doesn't end with the quick scaling false news websites. Trusted news sites have already fumbled with AI and produced misinformed copy. CNET was recently caught doing it, and BuzzFeed said it will start using ChatGPT-based technology to generate new forms of content, whatever that might mean. I think the problem is that it's not just what the pink slime guys are doing, Ben Ghani said, and I guess that's right. You got to start looking at places that were formerly, I guess, or maybe still currently, trusted sources if they're going to start using these chatbots. That's an interesting development that I hadn't anticipated from this, but I guess we got to be ready for it. All right, let's see. Other things that I thought might be worthwhile to share with you. Complete shift in focus, but I think a worthwhile one. Always worthwhile, I think, to shift focus to pick up on what Stephen Vladeck is talking about these days. And in this case, it is a New York Times opinion piece, a guest essay, illustrating a Republican legal tactic, and maybe we should start doing some legal catch-up work on a lot of things. But this, I think, an excellent explanation of some really interesting gaming and manipulation of the system down in Texas, in case you were wondering why it was that, let's see, every time something outrages Armando enough to come on the air in terms of decisions out of a district court and pointing out that for some reason it's a lunatic from Texas doing it, this will help explain why that is. Not just because Texas nominates lunatics, but a very specific plan here. Vladeck writes under the headline, "Don't let Republican judge shoppers thwart the will of voters." I mean, it's good advice. What does it mean? Here's how it starts with an illustration of exactly the problem we've been talking about. For the 26th time in 2 years, Ken Paxton, Texas's Attorney General, recently filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging a Biden administration policy. Everyone is familiar with that play by now, right? The suit, which in this case seeks to wipe out a new Labor Department rule about the investment of pension trust assets, wasn't filed in Austin, the state capital, or in Dallas, where the Labor Department's regional offices are, or anywhere else with a logical connection to the dispute. And this one is a new one on me, right? We've heard about all sorts of things. Usually it's about health care, vaccine mandates, maybe abortion, something like this. They try it on just about anything. What did we say this was? Labor Department rules about investment of pension trust assets. So, not filed in Austin, in the state capital, not in Dallas, where the Labor Department is based, or anywhere else with a logical connection to the dispute. It was filed in Amarillo. Why Amarillo? Well, by filing there, Mr. Paxton had a 100% chance, and you might think that seems outrageous, 100% chance, but 100% chance of having the case assigned to Judge Matthew Kaczmarek. It's Kacsmaryk. Matthew Kaczmarek, appointed to the bench, of course, by President Donald Trump in 2019, and a former deputy general counsel to the First Liberty Institute, which frequently litigates religious liberty cases before the Supreme Court. Well, 100% chance. Are you sure? Well, wait and see. Forum shopping, of course, has long been a problem in civil litigation. Clever lawyers use procedural rules to file in courts deemed most likely to be sympathetic to their claims. But what Mr. Paxton and other plaintiffs are doing is something far more nefarious. They're engaging in a novel and specific form of judge shopping, seeking out the specific judge whom they wish to hear their case, presumably because of how they expect that judge to rule. So, like the old school form of this as well. For instance, let's file this lawsuit in the 5th district, so that if we, whether we win or lose, if there's any appeal, it goes to the 5th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is known to be extraordinarily conservative and covers us, a defined area of the country. And you can say, well, the appeals panel that we're likely to get is likely going to be lean conservative. They'll draw 3 judges from the entirety of the panel, but because it's so overwhelmingly populated with conservative jurists, we're likely to get a favorable panel. But this is targeting individual judges. I definitely want to have this judge do it. And you just saw it happen in the Pervolago documents cases, where, I've already lost track in my mind of the name of the judge, but where they filed in a specific district, a specific courthouse, in order to make sure that they had a reasonably good shot. I think there's more than one judge there, but sometimes not, of getting this one judge who would rule in their favor. But this explains exactly how it happens. Let me just continue with this. But you see, it's progressed from, well, I'll put this case in play in a certain area of the country, and the odds are pretty good we'll do well, versus, well, now I can design a system that gives me a 100% chance of getting exactly the judge I wanted. And we did marvel at that was the case in Pervolago documents case, where they got the crazy who agreed to appoint the special master, which was quickly overruled. Anyway, like I said, so forum shopping has long been a problem. Now they're doing specific judge shopping. How does it happen? By taking advantage of a loophole in federal procedure, these plaintiffs are able to rely on a handful of district judges appointed by Trump to thwart major features of Biden's agenda. The tactic upends the tradition of random assignment of judges and raises serious questions about the fairness and impartiality of the judicial system. Yes, and it can and should be easily fixed, whether by the courts themselves or, failing that, by Congress. These cases, and others brought by private plaintiffs in Texas's small divisions, have put a hard stop on several ambitious Biden administration initiatives, among them ones related to abortion and immigration. They include at least 5 administration policies on immigration, as well as the student loan debt relief program, the Department of Health and Human Services post-Dobbs abortion guidance, and federal COVID vaccination mandates. More requests for such relief are pending. In November, the Alliance Defending Freedom filed a lawsuit in Amarillo that seeks to revoke the Food and Drug Administration's approval of, never could pronounce the name. I don't know. I don't hear it enough, of the medication abortion drug. It's, mifepristone. I don't know. I don't think I've ever actually had to say it out loud. It's pretty easy to find, though. I'll have to look around. Anyway, of course, one of the drugs used during a medication abortion, and seeking to block its use, which could, of course, make it unavailable nationwide. Now, here's how the loophole works. This is the important part. For decades, Congress has split up many of the 94 federal district courts into smaller divisions and has left it to each district court to decide how to divvy up cases among its divisions, right? Okay, so 94 federal district courts, and like the small states, have just one district. There's a federal district for Wyoming, etc. Larger, more populous states will have a northern division, southern division, or eastern, western, or all four. Right? So Eastern Division of Virginia, EDVA for short, where a lot of federally related cases that don't get filed in D.C. sometimes move, but Southern District of New York, the Sovereign District, as we sometimes call it jokingly on the show, Southern District of New York. There's a Northern District. There's, so all of these make up 94 different district courts. Inside each of the districts, the Southern District of New York, you can have divisions, and it would be left up to the SDNY to decide how to divvy it up into divisions. But, in some place that does it in relatively normal and fair fashion, you would say, all right, well, we have a federal courthouse here, here, and here that all fall inside the Southern District of New York. And there's 8 judges based at this one and 6 at that one and 11 at that one. And, but it's random inside the division as to which judge you're going to get. Well, as you can see, there's potential for mischief. Congress creates the federal districts, but each district can divide up both its cases and distribution of judges among the divisions, the subdivisions of the district that it creates. Texas's federal courts, in turn, have distributed their judges unevenly. Of the 27 divisions in Texas's 4 district courts, right? So there are 4, there's a northern, I assume they're north, south, east, west. They typically tend to do that. I'm not that familiar with Texas, but you see that they could have 4 federal district courts in Texas, a northern division, southern division, eastern division, western division, etc. Well, inside each one, you can divide it up into the districts. They've created a total of 27 divisions among these 4 districts created by Congress. Texas makes the divisions. There are 27 of them. And of the 27 that they created, here's a clever way around, the random assignment thing. In the 27 divisions, 9 of the 27 divisions have only 1 judge in them. And 10 of the 27 divisions have only 2 judges in them. I don't know how many federal district judges there are in Texas, but that makes 19 of the 27 divisions where you can either predict exactly which judge you're going to get because there's only 1, or have a 50-50 shot at the judge because there's only 2. Now, although other states require judges to move around from time to time, switch divisions, et cetera, in order to avoid judge shopping, well, Texas decided that it won't require that. Thus, any new suit filed in Amarillo is sure to go to Judge Kaczmarek, and any new suit filed in Wichita Falls goes to Judge Reed O'Connor, and any new suit filed in Victoria goes to Judge Drew Tipton, because they're the only judges in the division. You got the flexibility to design the divisions the way you want, make them 1 judge apiece, and then you can just pick your division and pick your judge every time. That's what Texas has done. The ability of litigants to hand-pick judges is strengthened by the increasing polarization of the judges sitting on district court benches. It's increasingly possible to pick a judge who may be an ideological outlier among his peers. If anti-abortion groups can funnel all nationwide litigation challenging federal policies to Judge Kaczmarek, and if anti-immigration groups can funnel all nationwide litigation challenging federal policies to Judge Tipton, that turns foundational principles about the structure of the legal system on their head. Federal law used to require plaintiffs to show why a specific division was a proper place for their suit, but Congress eliminated that requirement in 1988. Today, a plaintiff merely has to show that the broader district is an appropriate venue, which is relatively easy to do when the federal government, with a jurisdiction over the entire country, is the defendant, litigants of all political and substantive stripes have taken advantage of this loophole, including big corporations like Purdue Pharma, which filed its bankruptcy in the White Plains Division of the Southern District of New York, which has a single eligible judge, rather than filing in Manhattan, where it would have faced a random draw among more than a half dozen judges with more diverse reputations. But Mr. Paxton has made the loophole into an art form. Of the 26 anti-Biden suits that he's filed to date, he's filed 7 each in Amarillo and Victoria, 14 of the 26 in these two districts. So far, blue state officials have barely ever gone judge shopping. While they have picked friendly district courts like those in San Francisco or Honolulu, they were still subject to random assignment of judges within those courts. In his 2021 year-end report on the federal courts, Chief Justice John Roberts alluded to an instance in which judge shopping had caused trouble. The district judge assigned to hear all cases filed in Waco, Texas, had lured patent cases from across the country into his court by touting favorable procedural and logistical arrangements. In that case, when the criticism was not about a Republican state challenging a Democratic president's policies, there was general agreement that this kind of procedural manipulation was inappropriate, leading the chief judge of the Western District of Texas to change the case assignment rules. Today, any new patent case filed in the Waco division is randomly assigned among 12 judges in the broader district. But if judge shopping is a problem in the patent context, it's obviously a problem outside of it as well, and the fixes are both easy and obvious. District courts can, as Texas's Western District just did, change their rules of judge distribution on their own without any national legislation. District courts can also agree to transfer cases out of their single judge divisions to avoid the appearance of procedural manipulation, which the Biden administration has asked Judge Tipton to do for the most recent immigration challenge filed by Texas in Victoria. Failing that, Congress can require district courts, when dividing their business, to ensure that no case has a greater than 50% chance of being assigned to a single judge. Congress can also require that suits seeking nationwide relief against a federal policy be heard by 3 district judges, not 1, to avoid, or at least to mitigate, the judge shopping that has become so prevalent. Whatever the solution, doing nothing will simply accelerate what is already a race to the bottom, in which hand-picked outlier district judges for whom nobody voted are increasingly able to dictate federal policies on a nationwide basis. Right now, this practice may be beneficial for Republicans, but if nothing changes, you can be sure Democrats will try to take advantage when the next Republican sits in the White House. I'm not so sure about that necessarily. And regardless of who benefits in the short term, in the long term, the proliferation of this practice will be disastrous for the rule of law. Good points and good solutions being suggested. Whether or not we actually see anybody, take that suggestion to heart, whether that's implementing some of the solutions or whether that is Democrats using the same leverage to their advantage in order to make the Republicans sorry that they implemented the policy in the first place. Well, geez, I don't know. We don't see that happen all that often. As a matter of fact, let's see. Do I have any way of identifying quickly which one it is here? I think I parked in here somewhere in Pocket a discussion of the continuing problem that we have with the recognition of blue slips in the Senate Judiciary Committee, And yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to identify it in the very limited amount of time that we have left at this point, since it's almost time to hand things over to Justice Putnam. Might it have been here in... no, that's dealing with something completely different. But Thomas Zimmer is always a good bet that he was looking at this. Well, at any rate, somewhere buried in here, and maybe I can dig it up for tomorrow, is... oh, no, here it is. It is about... And it was Thomas Zimmer who was discussing it here. But I'll give you a hint anyway, even if I can't read through the whole thing before we end. But this from January 26th, and I'm sure I wanted to bring it to your attention while I was in the throes of the initial COVID infection, and so wasn't able to do that. But just to give you a taste of what's going on here, a message from a parallel universe, he says, one in which publicly pleading with Republicans to return to bipartisan cooperation in good faith, quote unquote, in good faith, has any discernible effect other than demonstrating to the world how desperately you are clinging to a normalcy that is long dead. He's referring here to the tweet from the Senate Judiciary Committee Democrats complaining that 130 is the number of the blue slips that Democrats returned for Trump district court nominees, but 12 is the number of blue slips that Republicans have returned for Biden district court nominees. We need to do better. I asked my colleagues to follow the examples of Senators Graham, Grassley, Young, and Braun and work in good faith. Well, Thomas Zimmer, I think, correctly identifying that ain't going to happen. And it's been like 19 times in a row here that you've been screwed on the blue slip situation and still have learned nothing. Frustrating, as he says, on many levels. Do Senate Democrats still believe that such an appeal to decency, normalcy, and good faith could have any effect on Republicans, that it might push them towards the light, get them to snap out of it, whatever they think it is? Or is it the idea that even if it doesn't convince Republicans to listen to their better angels, putting public pressure on them might have an effect? Well, neither one likely to work. Upsetting to see it still on
Radio.com.
in the offing here.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
There's more to it. Perhaps we'll return to it tomorrow. But first, it's a return to the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam, bringing you his collection of stories from around the country and around the world. Chrissy Teigen gets mentioned again today. We'll hear more about that. Plus, of course, as I said, always an amazing sampling of things we've had to overlook. Stay tuned for more next.